So after landing in Atlanta on the last plane ticket my parents would ever buy for me, I began training for Delta Airlines to be a flight attendant on April 11th, 1997. When your last name is a bird, flying just seems like the perfect profession. And flying around the world, helping people and wearing a uniform seemed so glamorous. During the 7-week process of training, I passed and completed all of the required tests, evacuations, and drills. They even showed us a video of an airplane cartwheeling down a runway in a ball of fire to show us how people survived. And 1 day of customer service training. The beginning of my career was rocky, to say the least. The very first flight of my career was a Boeing 727 flight with a hot meal service to Seattle, Washington. We served a full beverage service, restocked the open 3-tiered cart, collected trash, and then I began delivering meals 2 by 2 through the aisle, along with needed beverage supplies, while another flight attendant was in the aisle serving beverages off of the carts, and another flight attendant was in the galley setting up my meal trays. Picture a balance beam walk with moving and changing hazards, 60 times round trip. After the meal service was finished, we picked up all of the trays, put them all away, and we provided another beverage service an hour prior to landing. The complaints from customers about our slow service, impatience, and exhaustion were completely justified, but they were frustrating. This was the first time I'd ever worked a job in my life where my duty day could range from 5 hours to 18 hours and have no scheduled breaks for a meal or a bathroom break. And we also have to keep track of everything in a very small galley, and people like to show off their yoga moves in our galley space. And we spend nights in hotels in different cities every night. And so I was tired and hangry often. And because of complaints on this flight and several others after that, I was put on extended probation. And I had several meetings with my supervisor. Not as fun as you might think it might be. And so my company has this policy of open communication with our upper managers. And they had been sending us emails about how they're frustrated that we keep getting sick. And it was clear to me they didn't understand why. So I started compiling my own brainstormed list of ideas, and I asked for my coworkers' input, and then I compiled a list of 9 things our company could do to improve our quality of life on and off the aircraft. And I went down to a system forum in Atlanta, and I presented these ideas to them. And I don't know if it's because of me, but a little while later, we started to see antibacterial hand lotion, crew meals, some slightly longer layovers, and some hotels that had better food options. And I miraculously started feeling better right away. After all, they were items on my list. So I went on to go through a lot of other activities, and I was finally released off of probation after 18 months. And this was such a relief because I'd been through so much already, and I owed a lot of this to a lot of my coworkers that I observed, my new supervisor, who was firm yet warm and supportive, and my mom, who made an excuse to call me every morning while I was at home on reserve to ensure that I did not forget to call my morning window. Some people have an alarm clock. I have my mom. And so we also had, I had a little bit of issues here and there, and I got complaints not just from my passengers, but also from my coworkers. And some of the complaints started out as being inexperienced, and they moved on to being just how I did my job. And a lot of the problems for me were that I was dealing with becoming an independent woman, paying new bills I'd never experienced before, and just learning how to balance my work life with my personal life. And so I decided I wanted to change the way I dealt with customers, and so I had an opportunity to observe some people that I respected on the job and I started to soften my approach with my FAA-required safety checks and when I was dealing with my crew. So that helped in getting off of probation. While I was finally getting comfortable with the job, I was learning how to pack my bags. I had a good idea of how much food to bring on a 2-day versus a 3-day trip. I was loving my work. I got to a point where I took on some more stress. And I bought a house, and I had the stresses of that new purchase. I had to figure out some new bills, and I was also dealing with some other stuff around the house. And I just wasn't able to eat as well as I would like to, and I wasn't sleeping well. I didn't have that feeling of security. And I started to get a little bit more bossy at work, and so I received a small demotion, unfortunately. And one of the lesser-known benefits of being in the flight industry, airline industry in general, is that people tend to like to tell you in the corner of a party all the stuff that they hate about your airline. So people started telling me they weren't real happy about our flights not leaving on time as much as they would like them to, and some people complained about us not having their drink choices when we arrived at their row. And so I felt like it was time for me to go down, even though I'm thin on thin ice, I felt like I have to go down to the system forum and speak to them again. And so I went down and I suggested that we just standardize our onboard supplies. And I don't know if it's because of me, but shortly thereafter, my passengers were getting their drinks, and our flights were starting to leave on time more often. So exactly 4 years and 5 months after I started my training experience at Delta, 9/11 happened as I was getting ready for work. My mom called, and I turned on the television set, sat down on my coffee table, and watched the second tower absorb an aircraft and fall and collapse. I finished getting ready for work, and I headed into the airport. By the time I arrived in the lounge, the FAA had decided to ground all aircraft worldwide, and everyone in the lounge was sent home. The airline industry was particularly hard hit by 9/11 financially because people were even more afraid to fly. Delta, fortunately, was very well positioned because they could cut flights very quickly, and they could cut the salaries of non-unionized employees by 10%, like mine. They also offered voluntary leaves. But at this point, I'm enjoying my job, I'm having great layovers, I have wonderful coworkers, I'm not ready to leave, plus I have a house that I don't want to lose. And so I started to get sad thinking about losing all of these things. About 9 years into my employment, they sent me a letter saying that if they did not get enough people that would voluntarily choose to leave, that they might have to involuntarily let some of us go. And so my fear again of losing all of this stuff and my nerves just started to take the best of me. On a particularly long layover in Atlanta, a dear pilot friend of mine took me to see the movie The Prize Winner of Defiance, Ohio. But first we went to a rally. We went to a rally to see the pilot unions, and the pilot union president informed the pilots that they were a fantastic work group and that there was no way that they could possibly take a pay cut. But at this point, every single other work group at the company was experiencing financial hardships, including me. And so when they opened up the mics, I was like, I just had to walk up. And as I'm walking up, I'm thinking back to the preceding evening when my pilot friend took me to see that movie, The Prize Winner of Defiance, Ohio. The movie's a true story, based on a true story, about a mother who fed and clothed her family of 12 by winning jingle writing competitions, and it was a really great movie. And there's a particularly poignant scene at the end of the movie when the mother and the 10 children are around the table eating a light broth soup, and the father of the family, who's an alcoholic father, played by Woody Harrelson, well, he's eating a steak that she won. So when they called on me at the mic at the rally, I walked up to the mic and I said, "My name is Abigail Grebe, and I'm a flight attendant for Delta Airlines. What makes you think that you will continue to eat steak while the rest of the employees at this company are eating broth?" I didn't hear a whole lot after that because I was busy walking out to the hissing of pilots and their spouses. My pilot friend fortunately followed me. We left the rally and he took me back to my hotel. A little while later, I probably should have kept my tongue held at this point, but it just felt right to speak up for my absent coworkers. So shortly after the rally ended, but before the voluntary furlough ended, I had a breakdown. I had left town for a week. My house ceiling was being replaced and a couple of walls behind it were being replaced after a flood. And when I came back, I found out that a good friend from American Airlines, who was a flight attendant, had been let go. And my fears of losing my home and my family and my job all came flooding back again to me, and I was not sleeping and I was not eating well. And then a few weeks later, I had a trip to Oakland, California. And my coworkers were off having fun in San Francisco, and I had locked myself in my room, and I convinced myself that they were going to fire me. And so when I got back from the trip, I put in my resignation, and I just decided I couldn't handle this anymore. But the supervisors had a second sixth sense, and they decided that there's probably something wrong. So they called my parents, and they came to pick me up and took me in my car home. And I spent the night at my parents' house. And the next morning, I got up, and at the kitchen table, we discussed it. And I decided this is too early. It's not time to resign. So I pulled my resignation during the rescind window. And up to this point, I'd never taken any drugs stronger than allergy medications. But I decided to check myself into the hospital for a couple of days, try to get my chemistry back in line, and try to clear that depression cloud that had just completely engulfed me. I spent the rest of the month of April off, living with my parents, cleaning up my kitchen from all the dust and debris, painting the walls, and I had my brother and my dad rehang and install my cabinets so that I could use my kitchen again. This was the first Easter I'd ever had off in my entire career, and it was wonderful. Thankfully, enough people did take voluntary leaves, and I did not have to lose my job because they only had to take a few people on involuntarily leaves below me. And a little while after that, I don't know if it's because of me or not, but the pilots did take a pay cut. And thankfully, following that, I received a couple little promotions. So I started working for the Reds in their charter program along with several other professional sports teams. Although my favorite customers will still always be the people that I know already. So 11 years after I started training at Delta, I met a wonderful flight attendant. He is from Orlando, speaks 4 languages. He was kind and had a great sense of humor, and we hit it off immediately. And around the holidays, he needed someone to help him bring his Parisian son back to the United States. So I gave up 3 days of my off time to fly over to Paris, spend a night in the hotel, and fly back. And his son and I had decided to fly through Salt Lake City to get home because we were flying standby, and that's where the seats were. On the evening flight from Salt Lake City to Cincinnati, when it was already a very long day for both of us, he laid his head in my lap and fell asleep. A small tear fell down my eye onto my cheek, and I felt like I was finally appreciated. Little did I realize that he would go through and tell lots and lots of our coworkers about the story about it, and a lot of my coworkers finally started to see me in a nicer light. It only took 12 years. So a little while after that, I started getting compliments from customers, just in person on the plane. Wow, you really look like you're enjoying your job, and you really are such a hard worker. And sometimes they'd ask for my name, and I'd give it to them, and they would occasionally send in a compliment letter. And then sometimes when I was working up front, people would walk off and hand me a job well done card. And so I'm like, really, really appreciate this. And then a few years later, I finally decided, well, how many miles have I actually accrued over the year? Which, to answer your question, it's a little over $250,000 a year. And I finally started looking through my scrapbooks of my trip rotations just to see, and I found all these job well done cards that I had not yet submitted. So I went through the computer, and I went ahead and put in the codes. And in March, I received an invitation to this luncheon I had no idea existed. Well, it turns out that it is a passenger commendation luncheon that they do yearly for the top 1% of flight attendants for each base. It turns out that the job well done cards that I had turned in, added to the customer compliments that were on my file, put me over the top to be recognized as the flight attendant I had always wanted to be seen as. It was such an honor to represent the Cincinnati flight attendants because they are such a phenomenal base. And if I had had an opportunity to give a thank you speech, I would have thanked my parents, my supportive and awesome coworkers, my customers, of course, and my company, because they believe in second chances and don't hold a grudge against a flight attendant who occasionally speaks her mind. The luncheon was held on April 11th, 2018. What a way to spend my 21st anniversary at Delta Airlines. As a prize, they gave us an etched glass award from Tiffany's and a 3-course lunch, so I finally got my steak.